What's going on, people? Welcome to another episode of the Off the Ball podcast with me, your host, Chris LeBron. And on today's show, we're going to change it up just a little bit. Just a little bit. You know, Obviously, most of you guys listening, I do a lot of basketball stuff. It's a basketball podcast. But if you know me, you know I love wrestling. And I'm a huge wrestling fan, all things wrestling. So today, this is the first edition of Wrestling in the Post. So we're going to combine wrestling and basketball. And my first guest of the year is my man, Chris Van Vliet, four-time Emmy Award winner. Chris, what's going on today, man?
Always good to be on with a fellow Chris. And I still can't believe that LeBron is your actual last name. I mean, what are the odds? You host a basketball podcast and your last name is LeBron.
Yes. And like we talked about before, like it's people I've gotten that so many times, and I'm like, yeah, it's actually real Spanish. It's just, the fact that someone has it as a first name is more shocking. Is shocking to me.
Sure.
I've never met a LeBron with the first name. The last name, it's like it would be like Jones or Williams. Like that's how common it is.
Man.
But the first name, obviously, I've never met any other than LeBron James.
This would be like Chris Gretzky hosting a hockey podcast.
Yeah, you know what's funny? My he's about to be 8, and I named him Jordan. So his name is Jordan LeBron. And
oh my God!
I didn't do it just to do it, like to get a cheap pop. I didn't do it for that. I always liked the name Jordan. And then when I started to think, I'm like, that's it. That's going to be the name. But then I never put it two and two together. Like I was like, now I'm like, wait a minute. His name's Jordan LeBron. Oh my God, the pressure he's gonna have.
Yeah, this kid's gonna be a prodigy.
Let's hope so. But I'm like, no, by the time he gets older, Jordan will be like ancient, and LeBron will
Those will still be the GOATs though.
Yeah. So not too much pressure, but
his middle name's Kobe, by the way.
I tried to shoot for that for my second child, but I couldn't get it. She said no, not happening. So yeah, that was a good. But like I said, Chris, I appreciate you coming on the show on the first edition of Wrestling in the Post. Like I said, it's a basketball show, but if people know me, they know I love pro wrestling, and you're one of my favorite, pro wrestling hosts. So like I said, thank you for hopping on, man. This is really an honor to have you on the show.
No, thanks, man. I'm excited to be on the show. I appreciate you reaching out.
Yes. And like I said, I'm a big fan of yours, all the stuff you do, all the hosting. And as someone who does the show myself and does a lot of hosting and talking to people, I've learned a lot from you.
Wow.
just the little things you do, because like I feel like a lot of people just try to go at it. And I'm like, I just got to learn how to be a better host, because I don't know if you had this issues when you first started, but like trying to learn how to be a host and talking to someone, and just trying to figure out all the things to just be comfortable, and all that. And I've learned so much from you, because you've interviewed obviously a bunch of people, but just how you set up questions and all that. To me, that's something, a lot of things I picked apart from your from all the shows you've had, and I've been able to use it with me and my hosting. So that's one thing I wanted to, because I like that, their hosting stuff to me is what sets you apart from a lot of other wrestling hosts.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. And I think for me, when I was starting out, like I started in television. I mean, I'm still very much work in television, but I started off in television, and we were just on TV for 15 and 20 seconds at a time. So like, it's not that hard to be good for 15 or 20 seconds. I mean, the world we're living in now, like, we're doing hour-long podcasts. That is difficult. And the interesting thing, and you know this from turning on podcasts, you can know instantly whether you're going to relate to that host or whether they're good or not. And, it's with the same with guests as well. I mean, there's probably a bunch of people listening to this right now being like, I don't know who this guy is. And maybe I don't want to listen to this. That's the interesting thing. And I think that you've got to be able to use the skills that you have from whatever. I mean, we all host in our own lives in different ways. We're all doing interviews in our own lives in different ways. So I think you got to take from all those different experiences and then apply them to something like this.
Yeah. And that's what I've been able to, and just like I said, learning from just the little things as far as like transitioning and learning on the fly, like you can have notes ready, right? Like I have my notes ready, but we may talk about something that leads to something else, and just
Sure.
learning how to adapt to that, right? I mean, you've done millions of shows where you have what you're going to talk about, but a certain topic may go a little longer, or it turns into something else, and you got to learn how to adapt to that. And that's something that, like I said, watching your stuff, I've been able to translate into my hosting when I do podcasts, and just learning from that, because I feel like a lot. I've known people who have told me about that, and just like they're like, you have to learn how to, go on the fly. You gotta be able to just shoot on the fly, like,
Yeah.
and just figure things out as it goes, because you can get stuck and you're like, oh my god, I don't know what to do, and you just get stuck, and then you're like, oh my god, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do, blah, blah, blah. And that's like that's
Yeah.
my worst fear, is like not knowing what to say after like something that I didn't have written down. And it's like wrestling, right? You have everything scripted, and like and then something different, and then it's like, oh my god, I don't know what to do. Everything was a script. Everything was supposed to be this, and then it didn't go that way, and it's like, I don't know what to do. And it's like that ability to figure things out on the fly is, to me, is something that I've learned from, like I said, you and a few other guys. But to me, that's something that I've just scared to death of, just not knowing what to say after something, when we're talking about something that may have not have been on the agenda.
Yeah. I always relate this to like actual social interactions, because I think that unfortunately people look at an interview with a capital I and they start to get freaked out, like, oh my God, an interview. I don't know how to do an interview. But think, if you and I were to go out for a beer tonight, we wouldn't be like, oh my God, what am I going to talk to Chris about for 2 hours? How am I going to fill that time? It just flows, right? Or if you bumped into someone at a party, like if parties were still a thing, if you bumped into,
I don't know what a party is.
one day, we'll read about them in history books. But if parties were a thing and you just bumped into someone at a party, you wouldn't be like, okay, so when they're done talking about this, I specifically want to ask them about that. No, you're in the moment, you're present, and you're listening. And I'll never forget this quote from Larry King, rest in peace. He's the GOAT in interviews. And he said, I never learned anything by talking. And it's so true. When you're doing an interview, if you're just talking the whole time and you're not listening, you're not going to learn a damn thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I said, just having conversation. Like that's what I've done on a lot of shows. Let's just have a conversation. Let's just talk, and then it flows so much better. And that's what I just learned. Hey, let's just have a conversation. Let's talk. It doesn't have to be word for word. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk. And as if, like you said, as if we're at a bar or something. We wouldn't look at our phone and be like, okay, I'm supposed to say this to Chris. And then all right, but what if he says that? And it's like, that's not how it works in the real world.
How many times have you been out for like a meal or a beer with one of your buddies, and you specifically knew you needed to ask them about something? Maybe they got a new job, maybe they just went on vacation, new girlfriend, whatever, right? And then you just hang out, you're caught up in the moment, and then the bill comes, you're like, oh man, before we go, I got to ask you about that new job.
Exactly. And then you got to get the calculators out and all that, and try to figure out a split and all that. But them know now, so there's an easier way to do it. You can't get away with that as much.
Yeah, I only had an appetizer. You had a full meal. Why are we splitting this 50-50?
Those battles are the fun when you're like, dude, I only had bread and water. Why did I have to take 25
Dude, you got an imported beer. That was like $7. Mine was $4.
I think we've all had those where I just had water and this, and no, I'm not splitting it. You had a lobster and
lobster. Oh man, I don't know who you're hanging out with. You're hanging out with actual LeBron.
Man, I saw him once. I got close to him once across the street, if that counts.
Well, that totally counts. You saw him. Where was it?
It was actually in Boston. They were going for a Boston, was it? Boston it was a Red Sox Yankees game, and I was across the street and I saw him. I'm like, LeBron, I have your name on my arm. I'm like, maybe he will like respond and be like, oh really? And I was like, didn't work, but that's the closest I got to him, was across the street from Fenway.
That's so funny. I lived in Cleveland at the same time that he did. So I also, other than seeing him at games, I saw him in the wild once. We were at a movie screening, and this is when Johnny Manziel was in Cleveland. So he came to this movie screening with Johnny Manziel, and Johnny Manziel is, a very average sized, human compared to LeBron. So LeBron comes in as towering man, and then Johnny's next to him, like my size. I'm like, oh, Okay.
Yeah, Johnny Manziel. I've seen Johnny Manziel once too. He just I'm like, wow, he's my size. We're both the same height and
Oh
all
man,
that.
that guy, nobody can scramble like him.
No, yeah, he was fun in college. He was definitely
He
fun in college.
was.
That's for sure. But let's talk some wrestling. What was the first, that first, was there a match or pay-per-view or, a Raw or something that got you hooked into wrestling? What was that first moment for you?
So I was aware of wrestling in the 80s. So I was born in 1983. So I was aware of wrestling in the 80s. Whenever I would go to my grandparents' house, my grandpa just loves sports. So if
Mhm.
baseball or hockey or football or basketball wasn't on, Saturday night wrestling would be on. And that was my first like introduction to it, but I wasn't like a huge fan. I just remember like seeing the larger than life characters. You had Hogan and Macho Man, Ultimate Warrior, Repo Man, Sergeant Slaughter. But the match or storyline or time that really got me hooked was the Attitude Era. And I specifically remember it. I had a really good friend of mine. And in the 90s, when you had a good friend, you did this crazy thing called talking on the phone.
Oh,
Right.
that doesn't happen anymore.
Not happening anymore. So we talked on the phone a lot because that's just what you did. Right.
Mhm.
And I remember every Monday night at 9 o'clock, our phone call would abruptly come to an end because Raw was starting. And I remember going, well, we're not really done, talking about what we were going to talk about. So I'll hang on the line here with you. I'll turn on wrestling. We can kind of talk about it. And I was just sucked into it. And when I become passionate about something, man, I dive all the way in. I don't check the temperature of the water. I don't check the depth of the water. Just dive all the way in and figure it out once I get in there. And it was Austin McMahon that was the main storyline at that time. And that's what brought me in. And from watching Raw, then I started watching Nitro, and then I learned about ECW. And man, I went from watching 0 minutes of wrestling to watching literally everything. I watched Raw and SmackDown and ECW and Nitro and Thunder, Jacked Metal, Heat, watched it all.
Yeah, and funny that you mentioned Austin McMahon. I was actually at the event where Austin stunned McMahon for the first time,
Oh,
and
no
I didn't
way.
remember it till my cousin was like, and he showed me pictures, like little Polaroid pictures,
Yeah.
old school care, and he was like, "Yeah, we were there." I was
Oh,
like, "No,
wow. Where was that?
I think it was at the in Long Island. I think the event was. Yeah, I could be wrong, but it was in New York,
I
and
just
I'm
remember
from New York.
McMahon took the worst
Yeah,
stunner.
he just goes flops down and like he's like
Like
the worst stunner ever.
the
But
worst.
yeah,
Well, I don't know. I think the worst stunner might be the one that Trump took.
yeah, oh yeah, they were both bad.
Yeah, like I mean, especially Vince. Like he knows how
you,
to take a move. He
you
sees it
would
every week.
you think he would know better how to take
Guess it's
a
different
stunner.
once you've gotten kicked in the gut, and Stone
Mhm.
Cold Steve Austin's coming at you, 1,000 miles an hour.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Who were your guys growing up? Who were your favorites? Were you a fan of the big muscular guys that growing up, or were you a fan of that era? I know I was big. Bret Hart's my guy. Bret Hart's my guy. Shawn Michaels. Those guys are my guy. So who was your guys growing up?
The Rock is my guy. So,
Yeah.
you talk about Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. That was a thing,
Mhm.
95, 6, 7, like mid 90s. It was you were a Bret guy or you were
For
a
sure.
Shawn Michaels guy. And I think that as the Attitude Era really started to pick up speed, you were a Rock guy or you were a Stone Cold guy. And I was definitely a Rock guy. Like I still love The Rock. I have so much
Mhm. Of
respect for
course,
everything that
yeah.
he's built and for the man that he is. I've been able to interview him before, and he's great. So Rock for sure. But I was blown away by the people who could do the things in the ring that the average person couldn't do. So when Nitro had the cruiserweight hour, and you had guys like Evan Courageous and Sugar
Mhm.
Shane Helms,
Mhm.
and ECW had I was obsessed with what Kid Cash could do. That guy could hit a
Mhm.
Hurricane Rana out of anywhere.
Mhm.
I was also really blown away by the guys who looked a way that other people couldn't look. Like I thought that Sean Stasiak was just jacked,
I
right?
thought he was gonna be a superstar, like a
Right.
megastar.
And he had all the tools and had the lineage with his father, Stan the Man
Yeah.
Stasiak. So those were some of the standout people for me. But in terms of main event, top tier guys, it didn't get any bigger than The Rock for me. And then when we got into the 2000s, it's so embarrassing to admit this, but I had a Triple H poster in my room. I mean, try explaining that. I was what, 18, 17, 18. Try explaining to people that you have a man wearing his underwear, hanging on your wall. So I love Triple H. In fact, I was a backyard wrestler growing up in high school, and I taped my hands like Triple H, taped just the wrist on the left hand, and on the right hand, taped the wrist and the hand. So I was very inspired by him.
Yeah. Triple H's entrance. I think everyone at one point has took a bottle of water, put it in their mouth, and just do his little thing and just spit out water.
I would love to know how he came up with that.
I'm surprised. I've never heard actually someone, and I could be wrong, but I haven't heard anyone actually. Yeah, because to me that changed. That's a big part of it. Like I just said, everyone's done that at one point in their life. Whether you watch wrestling before or whatever, but like everyone's done that. And like, was it just a moment, like because a lot of things in wrestling just happen. Like So I would like someone to ask him, like, how did it start? Was it just super random? Did you just want to?
We need to get Triple H on here to find out the answer to this.
Yes, we need to do that because now I'm curious. How did it start?
I'm very curious.
Yeah, but like you said, like I love The Rock too, and everyone was an Austin guy. It felt like growing up, everyone loved Stone Cold, and I was always the person who liked the opposite. Like, no, I'm gonna like The Rock, and The Rock was because obviously when Brett left, I was devastated.
Sure.
The screw job, I started to hate Shawn Michaels. I'm like, oh no. And I used to love Shawn Michaels. I had the hat, the gloves. I still have one of my shirts from when I was like 7 years old in the attic. But I was like, Brett's gone. And he's just not there no more. Because back in the day, it wasn't as easy as it now, the dirt sheets and all that. Like, it's like, whoa, he's really not there. And then you hear someone like, I had some friends who only watched Nitro and like, oh, he's on Nitro now. I'm like, what? He really gone? Like that WCW thing was real, and it's like that was devastating. So trying to find like, all right, so who's going to be my guy? I'm not going to root for Shawn Michaels. I can't stand the guy.
Yeah,
he just screwed my hero, my guy. So then it took for me, like you said with you, like it became The Rock because he was just like he was electrifying, no pun intended. He was special. What he was able to do with the mic, I think that was what it was like. The mic skills are just.
Oh yeah,
far and away, like the greatest. Like just the way he talked down to people, Coach. Like you just had Coach on, and like, and when I watched the interview, I just keep thinking of when all the interviews he does with Coach, and he's telling him to do his dance, and he's kicking him, he's just throwing stuff on Michael Cole, and who's the other guy Kevin Kelly.
Hey, can you believe that The Rock, arguably the biggest movie star in the world, beloved by everyone, used to call this man a hermaphrodite? Can you imagine in 2021 calling someone a hermaphrodite?
Oh man, I mean, there's a lot of stuff.
Right, a lot of
stuff that you look back and you're watching like, oh, that definitely Rock can't say that now.
And it's funny how like wrestling like toes this really interesting line, because if an actor called another actor a hermaphrodite in the role, you just be like, oh, it's that's this character calling this character that. Wrestling is weird because even though it is one character calling this other character that, it's looked at as like, like a reflection of who they really are. It's just a strange thing.
It is. And I'm glad you brought that up because it's just like the fake thing. Everyone says, well, wrestling's fake. But I'm like, when you watch a movie, you're not saying, well, Iron Man's fake. And I don't believe it. When you're watching Marvel, everything's fake. You're not saying, Robert Downey Jr., you're fake. That's what you're doing is fake. So I don't understand why. And maybe I don't know. Maybe you can have a better feel. But I just don't get when people just say, "Well, that's fake. That stuff's fake." I always get irritated. Like I know wrestlers get irritated with it, but I know I get irritated as a fan. I'm like, I appreciate what they do. I think it's a form of art and all that. Like, I just don't get why it just looked differently, especially nowadays.
Fake's definitely the wrong word. Like choreographed. Or the endings of the matches are, that we already know them, but that'd be like someone leaving a Broadway show and going, it's actually fake. Hamilton's actually fake.
Yeah, Lion King's fake. So
but it's like, no, we were actually singing, we were actually dancing, we were actually putting together this story. Yeah, it's just the predetermined is probably the correct word to use, but it's a strange thing. Like when when someone who doesn't watch a lot of wrestling says, "I like, you know, it's fake, right?" It's like, yeah, well, you know that like in Star Wars, they're not actually going to other planets. It's a story.
You know, Darth Vader isn't really like you know what he is like. He
Yeah,
doesn't
or
really
like,
walk around with
you
the
know,
guy.
Anthony Hopkins in when he's Hannibal Lecter, he's not actually a serial killer.
Yeah, I don't know why with wrestling, especially with wrestling, why it just has that negative feel where people just talk down about it, and it's always something that's just, oh, it bothers me when people say that, like,
Sure.
like I don't know, I'm sure you've heard people talk about wrestling, and you're in a corner and you can hear them talk about, like, right, and they're like, oh, that fake crap or that, and you're just like, oh, oh my god, like, it's not fake. It's
It's not for everybody. I get
yeah.
that, right? I think that wrestling has a really similar type of fan base as soap operas. Like
Mhm.
if you miss a show or you miss 2 shows, you are completely out of the loop.
Yep.
So when you're a wrestling fan or you're a soap opera fan, you're all the way in on it.
Mhm.
And a lot of soap opera fans can't differentiate between the character they're playing and the actor playing them. In the same way that if you follow one of these wrestlers on social media, a lot of them use their wrestling name. You'd never see that in any other profession.
Yeah, yeah, for
Imagine
sure.
Bryan Cranston's username on Twitter was Walter White,
That
you
would be
know?
crazy, but there's still wrestlers that just protect the business, and they'll
Yeah.
still talk in wrestler terms, and I think obviously it's a different world we live in than we did in the Attitude Era, where it was harder to come through stuff. Obviously, there was still dirt sheets, and you had all that stuff, but it was like I said, you kind of really had to wait the next day to talk about it or whatever, or wait a whole week to figure out who's gonna might show up, like the
Yeah.
Jericho thing. Like, I didn't know that was gonna happen. It just
Yeah.
happened. I knew my butt was gonna be on at 9 o'clock watching Raw. I knew I can't miss it, so that's how you find out. But obviously today's stuff, it's the secret. I miss that part of wrestling where the secretism, like, it's not there, and it's like you find out that, oh, Edge is gonna show up at the Royal Rumble. I was like, no, why couldn't we just keep that in the wraps and just watch it? And that's the one part. That's why I tried with my son. I just try to keep it like I talked. Like, I'm not going to mention that. Oh, this guy might come back. No, let him watch it and just let him enjoy it. As it is, because that's how I did when I was growing up.
Yeah, when they can pull off like one of the really big surprises in wrestling, like I think that's the ultimate get in wrestling
Mhm.
because there's so few surprises in this world in general. And there's very few surprises in wrestling. So, and there's a few that I can think of off the top of my head, like The Rock showing up at WrestleMania 30, like that was like a huge surprise.
Mhm.
John Cena returning at the 2008 Royal Rumble to win it. Like when those can actually happen and everybody is surprised, like they're literally
Yeah.
sneaking people into the arenas to
Mhm.
make these happen. And that's when it's really cool to be a
Yeah.
wrestling fan.
Yeah. I remember I was at when Seth Rollins came back from his knee injury, and
Oh, okay, yeah.
there wasn't really much. You didn't really hear much about it. And then boom, Roman Reigns beats AJ Styles. You're like, all right, Roman Reigns wins again, and you're just like, all right, about to get up and get ready to leave, and then you just hear like people like, and you
Yeah.
hear like that faint, like people like they feel something, and then you see him coming, and then it's boom, it's like, oh wow, that was a shocking moment. So
Yeah,
like those
I
moments
was
are
at the
still.
Royal Rumble 5 years ago when AJ Styles made his debut, and nobody knew he was going to be there. I mean, there was talk that he might be in WWE at some point, but I'll never forget it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then
Yeah.
this weird music hits that we've never heard before, and everyone's
Mhm.
kind of like, "Ooh, what's this?"
Yeah,
And then the
yeah,
Titantron, I am phenomenal. It's like,
yeah.
I can't believe this.
Yeah, because I'm watching and I'm like, what's going on? Like, they're just panning to Roman Reigns and they're not going to the screen. So obviously you're there, you see everything, and I am phenomenal. And I'm like, what? Who is it? Like,
They
the
missed that
music.
on the camera.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, why? Because then you go on YouTube and there's two videos. There's the regular one with Roman, and then they show you like, why didn't you show that one?
Yeah.
So you can at least guess, like, all right, I am from, and then you could, I don't, and I'm like, oh my god, it's AJ Styles, and he's here, and like that was a surreal moment. But those moments are like the moments where like you're like, oh wow, like that's it brings you back to your childhood where you just you're so, everything was so surprising and all that. So
Yeah.
those are definitely the moments I miss. Was there a point, well, that you didn't watch wrestling? Because I know for myself, I would say around two, probably when The Rock and Austin were kind of fading away and going into retirement. I would say around 2003 when I stopped watching wrestling, maybe for a good 6-7 years, where I didn't watch. I wasn't there no more. Was there any point that you just had a point where you just didn't watch wrestling?
Yeah, I feel like everyone kind of goes in and out of these cycles. And, for some people, maybe it is 5 or 6 or 7 years where they leave. And for some people, maybe it's 5 or 6 weeks or whatever. But wrestling's kind of like death and taxes, like wrestling's always going to be there.
Yeah.
And I think if this pandemic has proved anything, it's that wrestling is like bulletproof. Like wrestling is pandemic proof.
Yeah.
So there was like in college, it would be tough, especially when I lived in a dorm, we shared one TV with, 30 people that lived on my floor. It was tough to convince people every Monday, like, all right, everyone, for the next 2 hours, we're going to watch this show you have no interest in. So I was still up to date on it. I was still reading the dirt sheets, but I would say that I didn't watch every Raw, every SmackDown for quite a good chunk of college. I still very much loved wrestling. Actually, when I was in college, I went to wrestling school. So I was still up to date on what was going on, but I wasn't like the die-hard fan where like, man, when I first got into this, I would watch it live. I would tape it. Then the next day I would watch it again. Like it was crazy. Like the amount of wrestling I was watching when I was in high school was like absurd. It was absurd. So yeah, it's definitely been cyclical for me, but there's never been a point where I didn't know who the champion was, or I didn't know what the main storyline was. And the cool thing now is with social media, if something really big happens, you're going to see that on Twitter. You're going to see that on Instagram almost instantly. And then you're going to keep seeing it because everyone will keep sharing it. So yeah, like, and now I have the WWE network. So it's like, I don't miss any pay-per-views. So yeah, wrestling is like always going to be there. Whether you leave for a year or you leave for 10, when you come back, wrestling's going to be there and it's not going to take you long to slide right back into it.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like, for my instance, like I actually dated a girl whose uncle was Taz.
No.
So, yeah.
That sounds terrifying.
Yeah. Oh, it was terrifying.
I hope she didn't look like Taz.
Yeah, no.
Taz.
Definitely didn't look like Taz. But I remember meeting him and and we would talk about, nothing crazy, but just going, because I think he was on SmackDown. I think he was commentating on SmackDown. So
Sure.
I was still kind of familiar with it. So, but then I started watching a little bit more, and then we broke up. And it's funny, we broke up right before I was supposed to go to his house, and there was supposed to be a lot of wrestlers there. And so I tried to buy my way back in. I remember this, and it's been a long time, but I remember this story. Like, she's like, we're gonna go to his house, and I don't know, it was probably a silly argument. I was 14, 15 years old.
Does he actually live in Red Hook, like he always talks about?
No,
He's just from there?
Just from there, yeah. I think he was in Long Island somewhere.
Okay.
And we were supposed to go there. She's like, yeah, these guys are going to be there. And she was just naming names. And I'm like, what do you mean? She's just naming names as if they're regular people. Like, no, those are like, what are you talking about? Like, and I'm like,
right.
And I have to make this up. She's like, no, I know why you're doing this, because you just want to go there. And she's like, no, that's what, you're not going. And I never got to go to his house. So, that was always, but that was a funny story I had, but after that, like when I didn't watch wrestling for probably like another, through to like 2010. And then I remember I started a new job, and a couple of guys, the guys were just talking about wrestling. And I was like, hey, so who's the guys? Like, I haven't watched in a while, like other than like watching a show here and there. And they're like, yeah, Edge is the world champion. I'm like, wait, Edge? Like, he was like, when I watched
tag team guy?
Tag team Edge? She's like, yeah. And it looks there's a guy named Sheamus. I'm like, who's that? And it's like hearing these names, I was like, oh wow, that's cool. John Cena's like, he's like Hulk Hogan. I was like, wait, Thugonomics? And I'm like, whoa. And so then I started watching, and then like you said, like you just got hooked. You start watching. It's like it becomes a routine, and you just like it just turned and haven't stopped since.
Wrestling's like a really social thing, and that's actually a really good example. If you have a few friends that are really into it, or you work with people who are into it, it's so easy to fall back into it because I mean, as you know, you can't just kind of like wrestling.
No.
You either don't like it, don't watch, and don't care about it, or you're all the way in on it. And when you're all the way in on it, that's probably what you talk about a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And it's crazy. You can relate. I relate wrestling to like real life. Like I'll put that wrestling into, there's so many things you go through in real life that are like a wrestling, like a wrestling storyline, and you try to
Yeah,
portray it. And I refer to basketball too. Like, so there's storylines in basketball that are wrestling. It's like, this is
sure.
like a wrestling storyline,
What's the
So,
ultimate story of good versus evil?
hmm and you get that, like, well, I remember when LeBron went to the Heat, and it's like, that's the NWO. That's Hulk Hogan walking down, uh,
Yeah,
and dropping the leg on Macho Man. That's what it was, And it's like, you could always put everything into wrestling. It always comes out like he was the bad, and then guess what happens? He goes to Cleveland. He goes back to the yellow, and he's the superhero again, and he's the good guy again. So it's like
it's
you can always pertain to that.
it's so true. Funny story. I was in Cleveland when LeBron left Cleveland. So I moved to Cleveland in 2010. So I got basically one season with LeBron. Then he goes to the Heat, takes his talents to South Beach.
Yeah.
And then ironically, coincidentally, my next job was in Miami. So then I went from Cleveland to Miami as
You took your
LeBron was
talents
then
to
going
Miami?
from Miami back to Cleveland.
That's crazy. Yeah, but yeah, that must have been crazy. Like, just like he leaves Cleveland, and like I'm sure it was just devastating. Like it was, it could it.
Oh,
That's it.
he was the lifeblood of the entire city. Like there was a joke that my friend is a comedian there named Mike Polk, and he made a joke that Cleveland's economy was based on LeBron James. And I mean, we're talking 2007, 8, 9, 10. Like, yes, absolutely was. Like the Cavs were selling out because LeBron James was there. And then he left, and no one really cared about the Cavs. And you want to talk about MVP? They went from winning 50 something games a year to the next year. Like, I don't know, they won like 14 games or 18
Yeah,
games or
they were
something.
winning like 20, 25 games a year.
Yeah.
Like it was bad. It was definitely bad. I've always, and I'm working on an article right now, and comparing basketball guys to wrestlers, and I've always said John Cena is LeBron James or vice versa.
Mm,
Like, as far as polarizing figures, right? Michael Cole always said the most polarizing figure in wrestling, and that same thing with LeBron, and and also like guys that people either loved or you hated, right? And John Cena sucks chant. The kids are, and same thing with LeBron. And I feel like as LeBron gets older, as John Cena got older, you started to see more people appreciate them more.
yeah.
Like, and I've always said that's just crazy how they like they're so similar as far as like they're the top of the top, both the best at what they do in their profession, and they get so much hate, but it feels like that hate has definitely simmered down, and as their careers are winding down, you start to appreciate, because you know that it's going to be over eventually. Like we haven't seen
Yeah.
John that much, and LeBron James he's getting towards the end of his career, and like you see, like, wow, these guys are actually really, really great at what they did for the last 20, almost 20 years, what they're able to do.
Well, we certainly appreciate John Cena more now because he's gone. Like, and I
Mhm.
think that was where a lot of the hatred came from, unfortunately, is that John Cena was just doing what John Cena was told to do. And, he was being shoved down our throats in the same way that Roman Reigns was being shoved down our
Mhm.
throats. And now that John Cena's, I saw some stat recently that John Cena hasn't had a match in 2 years.
That's great.
Oh, sorry,
And
a
the
match
kid,
on a
like,
Raw, I think. I
yeah,
mean, John Cena wrestled at WrestleMania in New York, so that was almost 2 years ago. But I mean, that's why we appreciate him so much more. But why doesn't this ring true for Tom Brady? Like people just, if Tom Brady's not on your team, people just hate Tom Brady. But then
yeah,
you listen to him in interviews, he's like the nicest, sweetest, most considerate man. Like
yeah, yeah.
Tom Brady would be your best friend.
Yeah, yeah. And the Tom Brady Cena thing probably relates more, because those are guys who, like for instance, Tom Brady was a 6th round pick. Like John Cena was like the bottom of, we all know the names,
John
Orton,
Cena was
Lesnar,
almost
Shelton
fired.
Benjamin, like all those names, Batista, like he was the bottom of that. And he overcame all that to be the top guy. Same way Tom Brady went from being 6th string quarterback to be the top
Being
guy,
in 10 Super Bowls.
and then is going into his 10th Super Bowl. So like that story probably relates more than LeBron, more so because LeBron was supposed to be the guy from the jump, and
Yeah.
obviously but like the hatred and all that. But like, yeah, you're right.
LeBron might be more like Orton, where you're the chosen one. Like Randy
Mhm.
Orton came in, good looking guy, could work, had a great look to him. And it's kind of like, oh yeah, that guy's gonna be a world champion one day.
Yeah.
Whereas I always struggled with people saying that John Cena was the underdog, because I'm like, come on, he's 6'3" and 246 pounds. How is he an underdog?
Yeah.
But then you think about it, you're absolutely right. Like John Cena actually told me he was very close to being fired. And then Stephanie McMahon heard him freestyling on the bus one day.
Hmm.
And that led to his whole thugonomics gimmick. And then he just kind of took the ball and ran with it.
But isn't it crazy, like just being at the right place at the right time, like,
Yeah.
and just having someone hear you, and then like, whoa, why? Okay, that's a talent. Like we need to utilize that.
Yeah.
And then he just maximizes that, and then takes it. He takes his ball and just keeps running and running. And then he's the guy. Like you
And
said,
it's,
Orton was supposed to be the guy. Batista's supposed to be the guy. Lesnar's supposed to be the guy. Shelton Benjamin's supposed to be the guy. But John Cena overcame all that to be the guy in that company.
and it's stories like that that always make me wonder how many people have that talent, have that ability, have that drive, but just haven't had someone go, yeah, you got it. Like just someone notice them. And is that on them for not pushing harder?
Mhm.
Or is that just bad luck that they didn't get noticed?
Yeah, that's definitely crazy, and just like the story is just it's crazy. Like his whole story of how he got there, and just like you said, he almost got fired. Just to think, this guy who's arguably one of the greatest of all time, like obviously the best of the last 20 years, the top guy in the company, was almost fired.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that's unfortunately how wrestling goes. If they don't have anything for you now, they're likely not going to keep you around. But then you look at a great story like Drew McIntyre is a perfect example for this.
Mhm.
They didn't have anything for him. So he left and went, all right, fine. I'm going to go leave and become a bigger star than I ever was here. I'm not going to be in 3MB, this 3-man band gimmick that you're putting me in. He left and, made a name for himself. WWE took notice, signed him to NXT. And I mean, my God, look at him now.
Yeah, and that shows just like the persevering. Like just a lot of people, they get to the WWE, that's their dream job, and then whether they get fired, whatever happens, and that can really affect you, right? It's like if
Yeah.
anything, you go to the NBA and you get cut, and now there's nothing there for you. That could really, just mess with you. But what
Yeah.
Drew did was like, all right, I can sulk here and just be upset, or I could do something about it. Let me
Yeah.
transform my in-ring style, my body, everything, and just show them that, hey, I'm better than what I showed you. And one thing I like about Drew is that he doesn't blame WWE on everything. He puts it on himself. Like, no, I messed up. Like a lot of guys will blame all the creative and
Yeah.
all this,
A
and
lot
some
of
of
that.
it can be true, and some of that could be true in a lot of things. But for Drew, he put it on himself. Like, no, hey, I messed up. So you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna go revamp my old style. I'm gonna go overseas. I'm gonna go kick ass. And go to Impact, go all these companies, and then I'm gonna come back because my dream is to be in the WWE and be the guy. And like we don't see that a lot. Like he was in 3MB. Like that's like the bottom of the bottom. Like that's a death sentence in wrestling, right? You're in that. That's a
Oh,
death sentence.
absolutely.
And you
And
go
my
to
hat's
King.
off to guys like that who have a dream and they have a very clear focus of what it is. Whether we're talking about wrestling, basketball, any other sport, maybe you're an entrepreneur. If you have a clear goal that you want to attain, well, then it's easy to just reverse engineer back from there. Like, all right, I want to be like this guy, or I want to reach this goal. What do I have to do to get there? Well, I got to do all these other things on the reverse. Maybe that's step 14 and I'm at step 2. I got to figure out what step 13, 12, 11, 10, all the way back is. And my hat's off to people that don't get discouraged at step 6, along the way.
Yeah, and I always related to podcasting. Like I've done podcasting before, but I just never could get past the second step. Like they always say, like getting past that first show is the hardest.
Yeah.
They say 60% of people don't get past the first episode.
Yeah.
But then it was just like, you know what? I want to make this to something. So like putting in the work, you figure, like you said, learning from guys like you, like who are hosting and like, all right, like, how do I incorporate that and putting it into my way, like, and just doing that, learning how to do all the, like I said, transition points and all that, and just learning all that, and just like knowing that, all right, I want to do this, I'm going to make it work, and if I fail, it's going to be because of me, not because I, didn't try, like, so I'm going to put
Yeah.
100% into it, and I've been able to take steps where I'm like, whoa, I got here, I got here, I got here. I'm like, whoa, my show's on the radio. Like I got this many lists. I'm like, whoa, and be able to get good big time NBA players on my show, and top college players and top journalists and guys like you are on my show. Like, and it's just just putting that work in, and like that's what you see from Drew, like just putting that work in, not getting down on yourself and just feeling bad for yourself. It's just constantly working, 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 working.
Yeah, man, I always say, Chris, that the two hardest things in podcasting are number one, starting the podcast, because everyone talks about it, everyone dreams about it, but actually hitting record on the microphone and then going for half an hour, however long you want your show to be.
Yeah.
That's not an easy task.
No.
And then number two is continuing, once you've started, continuing to keep your podcast going, because like you said, something like 60% of podcasts give up after one episode, something like 80% give up after 5. And I get it, you put all this time into the research and the planning and the recording and the editing and the uploading, and then you go, oh my god, only 16 people listen to this episode. Is it worth it?
Yeah.
But I think that's actually the wrong way to look at it. You should be doing podcasting as a passion project. If you love it, then other people out there will love it too. It's just a matter of them finding it. And if you got 16 on your first episode, then you got 19 downloads on your second one, well, hey, guess what? You just increased, you increased by 20%. Like, keep that going. Exactly. And I think that as long as you're trending in that right direction, keep doing it. And I think that the biggest thing is, I think a lot of people start podcasts as like, I'm going to be the next Joe Rogan. It's like, well, that's like dribbling a basketball in your backyard and thinking you're going to be the next LeBron. Like, yeah, sure. It's possible. It's just, it's a little unlikely. So take it one step at a time.
Yeah. And that's you're 100% right. It's just take it one step at a time. I think people look at the numbers and automatically get discouraged, or they'll get happy because the one show did good and the next show does 4 listens. And like, oh man, that's it, I'm done. And it's like, no, you got to go. To me, when I get a lot of people who ask me like, oh, how do you make money and how do you do this and podcasting? I'm like, no, first of all, that's the wrong mindset to have. You do it because you just love it. It's a passion, right? You just mentioned being a passion about what you're doing, and that's how it should be about, just being a passion. And then, the better you get, if things come with that, then that's great, but you should always do it because you just love it and passion. Don't look at the stats, I don't even like looking at the stats, and I've had a little bit of, momentum and success with it, but I don't like, because I just like, hey, let's just each show, new show, let's just keep working, keep better, get better and all that. And to me, that's why it keeps me going, is just the fact that even one person would listen and reaches out to you and says, hey, that got me through the day, man. Like, I had a 2-hour drive home. I got to listen to your show, man. It got me through the day, man. Good show. And like, you can have those days where like, oh, I got to do editing, all that. But that one person saying that could just be like, wow, that makes it worth doing the next show and continuing that. So I've always took pride in, making sure to put a good show on, because I know there might be someone who may need that hour and a half to just get their mind, works hard, listen, life's hard, right? You just need that compression, just listen and just enjoy something, for an hour and a half. So
and the idea that you can reach someone that you never would have reached before is kind of crazy. Like, before the internet existed, it was a phone call, it was a letter, it was going to some event, like a networking event. Now it's like, if you love something like crazy niche, like if you're passionate about peanut butter, you can go on like some peanut butter Reddits, and you can go on some peanut butter websites, and like all of a sudden you're surrounded by other people who are passionate about the same thing as you. And that's what's so crazy about this time.
Yeah. And like I said, the pandemic, it's obviously it's tough for everyone, but for people who make content like yourself, like, hey, this is an opportunity to to put your stuff out there. And, you know, like you said, people need to listen to stuff, right? You know, everyone's home and all that. And it just, like you said, I felt like I had, you know, it was my job to put out some good stuff so people can listen to enjoy, because like I said, life's tough, especially this year. It's been a tough year. So you
It's
can
been
put
really
some smile on
interesting.
people. Yeah.
It's been interesting because podcasting is very habitual, right?
Yeah.
Most people are listening to their podcasts. Two main places people
Mhm.
listen to podcasts: commuting to work, which nobody's really doing right now. I mean, it's
Mhm.
maybe kind of starting to get back. And number two, at the gym, which for a long time wasn't open. So
Mhm.
you take those two things out, the commuting and the gym, and podcast numbers last March started to dip down a little bit. I mean, they've recovered now, but because people have different habits now. And that's the interesting thing. I mean, think back, Chris, when this thing first started, we thought it'd be 2 weeks. Then we
A
thought it'd
week,
be a
yeah,
month.
a week or
And then
two
we
was
thought it'd
like,
be
all
two
right.
months. And here we are almost a year later.
Yeah. And then like no sports, no nothing. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, for me doing a basketball podcast, you tell me there's no basketball, like, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
Like,
What
and then
did you
like,
do?
yeah, and it's like I was like, oh, how do I? And I think what helped was that it made me become more creative. As
Oh,
far
that's
as
good.
there's no basketball, but you could
Yeah.
still talk basketball. You know, just because
Right.
there isn't, but we figure it out where you talk, where you bring back stuff from the past and try to bring it to the present, or incorporating stuff like wrestling and just creating shows about that, like, you know, talking about, all right, what wrestlers would you compare to the NBA, like, and just figuring out shows like that, and just like, okay, there is stuff, like, just because there isn't basketball on TV,
Yeah.
you could still create. And then it opened up my mind and my creative juices more, because I wasn't the most creative person. I just relied on, hey, this basketball, I talk about what happened, but then it's like, all right, there's more to it. So like creating stuff like that, creating certain shows, you know, that just, and that definitely opened up my mind when there was no basketball, because I freaked out. I was like, oh my God, like there's no basketball. Like, do I stop? Do I do this?
Right.
What do I do? Like that, like people want me to talk basketball and it's not there, you know? So that definitely, but it opened up my mind so much to just be more creative and
Well,
figure
I
stuff
mean,
out.
yeah, you had to use like a different part of your brain, but you know, you're that much better for it now.
Yes, yes, yeah. It definitely opened up my mind a lot. All right, so before I let you go, and like I said, Chris, I really appreciate your time, man.
Oh, I appreciate you, man.
This has been a lot of fun. I want to ask you a few questions. I want to ask you one. If you're at the dinner table, you have three guests, past or present, that you can have at the dinner table. Who's joining you at the dinner table?
Well, we're eating pizza, so that's determined. I'm gonna have The Rock there just because he's my favorite person to interview. He's just an incredible inspiration. So The Rock's over here. Then I've always wanted to have a long conversation with Oprah. I've interviewed her briefly, but Oprah's going to be there. Then I gotta fill this third chair. I think I'm just so I mean, look, there's any number of people that it could be, but I'm so fascinated by what Elon Musk has built. I drive a Tesla. Elon Musk is like a literal genius.
Oh yeah.
So I think it'd be him. And I think, I mean, the conversations that we'd have, the four of us, well, it'd really just be me listening to them talk.
I was just about to say, I'm just sitting back and just be
Yeah,
like,
I have nothing to add to this conversation.
that net worth right there alone is the
But
net
I
worth.
mean, those are just three fascinating people. They're also three examples of people who worked their ass off to get in the position that they're in right now. And I think it's so easy in our world to see someone who's successful and go, oh, yeah, I mean, they just got that given to them. No, not at all. Like if The Rock didn't continue to try, he'd still have those $7 in his pocket and that's it.
Exactly. Like the story of The Rock, like you said, people assume The Rock, you know, superstar, you know, Hollywood megastar, all this, all the money, but it wasn't easy. Like he played college football and, you know, got cut from the
Cut from the
Canadian League,
CFL.
and then, you know, goes to the WWE, and, you know, supposed to be the chosen one, but then it didn't work out with the first gimmick, and it's like, whoa, what do I do now? And then tries to, hey, let me get on the mic once, Vince. Let me just get on the mic once, and then that opportunity, boom, it took off.
Yeah, he told me that his favorite promo is that first promo where we said, The Rock's a lot of things, but sucks ain't one of them.
and that's crazy. His journey, like I said, it's definitely been awesome. All right, who's the one wrestler that you marked out for that you saw in person? Was there a mark out moment, whether it was internal, where you're like, oh my God, I'm in the presence of this guy, or when interviewing, was there ever a mark out moment for you?
Yeah, and I'm going to take it way back here because yeah, I've interviewed some amazing people, and every time I interview someone like The Rock or Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, it's a cool moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to take this back to I was 17 years old, and the XFL was having a kickoff party in Toronto, and Christian, Trish Stratus, and Kurt Angle were the guests of honor at this party. So my friends and I in February, in Toronto, waited outside for 6 hours to get into this event. And this was this huge thing. It was called the Palladium. It was like this huge indoor like gaming area. And we're like, oh my God, we are massive wrestling fans. And now we're going to be here with Kurt Angle, Christian, and Trish Stratus. Crazy. Then we realized that they were actually in this like VIP area, and we were just like in the general area with everybody else. So I was like, okay, so we got to see them. We totally freaked out when they all walked by us and then got on an escalator and then went to their VIP section. We're like, we waited in line we took the train into the city, waited in line for 6 hours in February in Toronto. It was very cold. And then this random girl whose dad was like, some sort of high up guy. She goes, oh, we got these extra wristbands for the VIP area. Do you want them? I'm like, do we want? Of course. Yes. So that was a big mark out moment. We put on these wristbands. They got us into the party. And there we were, Kurt Angle, Trish Stratus, Christian sitting right there. And they were some of the first wrestlers that I ever met. And it's funny because I've interviewed Kurt Angle since, and I told him all about that. And he's like, that's crazy. That came together. All because like this girl snuck us into this thing, which I don't know who she is, but thank you for that great moment.
That's awesome, man. That I'm sure you were just going through it like Kurt Angle too, like Trish Stratus.
It's 2001, so they were all like at the very top of their game then.
They were on top of their game for sure. All right, obviously living in Canada, Canadian wrestlers. I mean, we can have a whole show up just about Canadian wrestlers.
Yeah.
So who's on your Mount Rushmore of Canadian wrestlers?
Oh man,
I know that's tough.
Hart, Chris Jericho,
still going at it too, which is amazing.
Oh man, he's incredible. Chris Benoit. I know that's a obviously tough situation because of what happened in the final weekend of his life.
And that interview you had with his son, by the way, just kudos. That was a tremendous interview.
Thank you. But up until then, I mean, Chris Benoit was one of the very best to lace him up and get in the ring. And it's obviously incredibly unfortunate what happened, very tragic what happened that last weekend of their life. But there's three. And then who's going to be the final one on the Mount Rushmore?
It's tough. I know. It's tough. Putting you on the spot.
It is. It's so tough. I'm going to go with Edge because of what Edge did for tag team wrestling. Then Edge had an incredible singles career. I mean, you want to talk about guys who are still going at it. Edge is still going at it. So there we go.
Yeah. Can't go wrong with that. Can't go wrong with that. So last thing, you do this a lot on your show. I'm gonna flip it. What are you grateful for?
I love this. Yeah, I always say, be great, be grateful. I actually start every day and end every day by saying out loud the three things that I'm grateful for. I'm so grateful for my family. My parents have been together for 46 years.
God bless. God bless.
They're incredible and they're best friends, and they've shown this amazing example of what true love is. So super grateful for my family and my parents. I'm grateful that we live in a time right now that we can do this. You and I are on opposite sides of the country, and we're able to chase our passions, chase our dreams with a microphone and a camera. Like, what an amazing, incredible time to be alive. And that goes for whatever it is that you're passionate about. We have a supercomputer in our pocket.
Exactly.
And with that, we can be in touch with the entire world just with tapping our thumbs a few times. Like, I'm so grateful to be alive in this time. And number three, it's such a crazy time in the world. I'm super grateful for my health. When there's a lot of people that are dealing with COVID and dealing with the repercussions of that, like, I'm so grateful to be able to have my health. So there you go. There's three. I love that question.
Yeah, because that's something. Ever since you started doing that, I started to just incorporate that in life too. Just being grateful. Like there's, like you said, the world is it's been tough this last year, and just being more appreciative of things, like health and family and all that. And that's something that I took away from you that I'm like I'm going to incorporate in life more. Just being grateful and just
That's awesome.
appreciating things. Yeah,
It's hard to be pissed off when you're
yeah.
grateful. It's hard
Hmm.
to be in a pissed off state of mind when you're being grateful. And Tony Robbins always said, if you trade your expectations for appreciation, then you're just going to live a great life. And think
Yeah.
about it. Instead of expecting things, appreciate the situation that you have and then live within that.
Exactly. And that's definitely something I'm living by. But Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, and like I said, thank you so much for this. These last 55 minutes, hour. Chopping it up with me, one Chris from another to another, and just just having a really dope conversation. I really appreciate your time.
No, and I really appreciate your time, Chris. Thank you so much.
Yes. As my son is jumping around doing wrestling, I think he just did an elbow drop from the top of
Ah, I
the.
love it.
He's
Jordan,
been,
I love you. You're rock. You rock.
he's been wrestling. Where is he wrestling? What are you? He's been wrestling a dog, a pillow, the dog. Thing. I don't know why, but he's
I
wrestling.
hope he wins.
I think he wins. I think he put himself over. I think he put himself over. But like I said, Chris, I really appreciate your time. And like you said, I love your work. And like I said, I take a lot of stuff from what you do and incorporate it into my stuff. So just thank you for everything you do, all the shows you do, and just being an inspiration to me. You really, I watched every single one of your shows. I look forward to watching it. And like I said, I wish you nothing but the best, man.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate the kind words, and you're doing a great job, man. I mean, we said there were two tough things in podcasting, starting and continuing, and I mean, you've just crushed that. So keep up the great work, man.
Yes. Thank you so much, Chris. That really means a lot. So before we officially go off, is there anything you're doing, upcoming projects, social media, plug all that good stuff?
Well, wherever you're listening to this, you can find my podcast, Insight with Chris Van Vliet. I'm just obsessed with reverse engineering what makes successful people so successful, their habits and their techniques. On YouTube, I'm Chris Van Vliet, and on social media, Chris Van Vliet, VanVliet.
Yes. So like I said again, thanks for coming on, Chris. Really means a lot. That's the first edition of the Wrestling in the Post, with my guest Chris Van Vliet. Thank you guys for listening. The show will come out in the next few days, so make sure to follow Off the Ball Pod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'll have all the details when the show will be up. But like I said, Chris, take care, my man. Be safe, be well, and like everyone else, be kind to each other. All right. Thank you for listening. Take care.